Central restaurant allowed two 15-year-old employees to work more than 3 hours in a day and more than 18 hours in a week, all violations of the child labor provisions.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Let's go ahead and jump right into Boss Watch. Every week, we see working people lambasted on the news for petty theft or trespassing or something like this. You see their mugshots on the evening news, but you never see bosses' mugshots. Despite the fact that wage theft accounts for more theft than all other property crime combined, despite the fact that you are just as likely to die on the job in Alabama as you are to be murdered, but you don't hear about that. So we try to rectify that every week. And so with that in mind, let's head down to the state of Florida, where the U.S. Department of Labor found that a Miami excavation contractor with a history of federal workplace safety violations could have prevented the death of a 48-year-old diver who drowned while removing debris in a canal in 8 feet of murky water. They could have saved him by having required rescue procedures in place. The department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration cited Downright Engineering Corporation for 18 serious violations after its investigation into the January 2023 incident. The agency has proposed $258,000 in penalties. Since 2018, OSHA has cited this company for various safety violations, including in 2019 for failing to provide an injured worker with prompt medical attention and not having medical services and first aid readily available. Specifically in this instance, for the January 2023 death, OSHA has determined that the company failed to do the following. They failed to train dive teams in equipment use, in techniques and emergency procedures required to perform underwater tasks safely, and to make sure all dive team members had CPR training. You have dive teams. This is not just, I'm just walking down the street. That's a dangerous thing, easily. And you're not training them in how to use their equipment? They also failed to assess water conditions before diving and require an experienced dive team member to supervise dredging operations in a canal with limited visibility. They also failed to provide workers with a safe practices manual when performing underwater diving and maintain a first aid kit, emergency aid list, resuscitator equipment, and emergency procedures. They also failed to brief workers on basic diving procedures and environmental conditions. They also failed to assess the safety and health aspects of the diving mode, the underwater conditions, or emergency procedures. They also failed to provide employees with safety harnesses to assist an injured diver from the water. They failed to provide a two-way communication system and a marked umbilical cord in 10-foot increments. They failed to provide a non-return valve on the surface supplied air, and they failed to provide a life jacket or buoyant work vest and life-saving skiff. They also failed to keep air compressor intakes away from areas containing exhaust or contaminants, and they also failed to record equipment modifications, tests, calibrations, or maintenance service. The company has 15 business days from the receipt of these citations and penalties to comply, to request an informal conference with OSHA, or to contest the findings before the Independent Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission.
Wow.
Heading up north to Virginia, the U.S. Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division found that an employer violated multiple requirements of the H-2A Agricultural Worker Program by failing to do the following. They failed to compensate 55 workers, 50 of whom came from Mexico, for all hours worked. That's also described as theft. They failed to comply with requirements of the agricultural job order. They failed to pay the hourly adverse effect rates of $13.15 in 2021 and $14.16 in 2022 and $14.91 in 2023. They failed to comply with safety and health requirements for housing and transporting H-2A workers. They failed to request a pre-occupancy inspection of housing in a timely way, and they failed to comply with other applicable federal, state, and local employment-related laws and regulation. The Wage and Hour Division recovered $45,384 from the company. They assessed $8,998 in civil penalties for 55 workers which were affected, which includes 50 H-2A program workers and 5 others. The Mount Clifton Fruit Company, LLC, that's the company involved in these allegations, is an agricultural fixed-site employer who specializes in growing and harvesting a variety of apples, which are sold retail, direct to consumers, and to processors in the United States. Heading to South Carolina, a federal court has sentenced a South Carolina labor contractor, Balcazar Nature Harvesting LLC, and its operators after a U.S. Department of Labor and multi-agency investigation found that the employer subjected migrant farm workers to exploitative labor, confiscated passports, and housed workers in unsafe and unhealthy conditions. The farm labor contractor provided seasonal and H-2A workers in Lexington to harvest fruits and vegetables for distribution and sale at local farmers markets and by national and regional grocery chains such as IGA, Ingles, and Whole Foods. On June the 15th, 2023, the U.S. District Court for the District of South Carolina sentenced Enrique Balcazar of Batesburg to 40 months in federal prison and 3 years of court-ordered supervision following his term of imprisonment. The court also ordered him to pay $11,332 in restitution and to forfeit 23 firearms, ammunition, body armor, and more than $32,000 in funds.
Wow.
He pleaded guilty to labor trafficking and passport confiscation to further labor trafficking in September of 2022. The court also sentenced Enrique's daughter, Elizabeth Balcazar, to time served of 2 months after pleading guilty to fraud in foreign labor contracting, also in September 2022. The court ordered her to pay $508,125 in restitution for unpaid wages owed to 55 workers, again, also known as theft, and subjected her to 3 years of court-ordered supervision, a 1 year of curfew, and 100 hours of community service to benefit the immigrant community. In addition, the court also ordered Balcazar Nature Harvesting LLC to pay jointly and severally $508,125 in restitution to 55 affected workers and forfeit more than $32,000 in business funds. The business is also subjected to 3 years of probation.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
The court's action follows an investigation by the department's Wage and Hour Division that found Balcazar, operating as Balcazar Nature Harvesting, violated multiple requirements of the H-2A Temporary Agricultural Workers Visa Program and the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. Specifically, the division determined that Balcazar violated federal laws by not meeting job orders requirements, by omitting terms and conditions, including additional work sites, by intimidating and discriminating against workers with threats to call immigration services if workers left their jobs. The employer also withheld some workers' passports and visas. The employer failed to pay workers based on the adverse effect wage rate and making them work for more hours than the job order stated. They also failed to require workers to purchase gloves and knives needed for their tasks. They failed to reimburse workers for inbound and outbound transportation to and from the place of residence, and the employer failed to reimburse workers for their visa costs of $190 each. They failed to meet the 3/4 guarantee for work hours because workers left the jobs due to exploitation, and the employer also paid seasonal workers less than H-2A workers for the same work. They charged workers $100 per week for meals, which is a cost not disclosed in the job contract, and they failed to provide housing that met safety and health requirements.
Wow. Just really despicable stuff there.
Yeah. Let's head to the home state of Alabama, where the U.S. Department of Labor investigators found that Central Restaurant, a Montgomery fine dining establishment.
Oh, yeah. I'm familiar with Central. I've eaten there before.
Yeah. they failed to pay some tipped employees the full minimum wage for time that exceeded a period of 30 consecutive minutes performing general preparation work or non-tip producing activities, which is a violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act. By doing so, the employer lost its ability to claim a tip credit for the time spent doing non-tipped duties, obligating them to pay their employees the full minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. Investigators also learned that the employer paid some workers overtime at rates lower than required by law. In addition, Central Restaurant allowed two 15-year-old employees to work after 7 p.m. on a school night, more than 3 hours in a day, and more than 18 hours in a week, which are all violations of the child labor provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act. The back wages and liquidated damages owed to workers are $21,146 to 23 employees, and they assessed $1,582 to address the child labor violations. Heading over to Texas, an El Paso home health care and hospice provider expected employees to work long days to care for people in need, but failed to pay 133 of its employees the overtime wages that they earned, the U.S. Department of Labor has found. The investigation by the department's Wage and Hour Division led to the recovery of $501,211 in overtime and liquidated damages from San Lorenzo Adult Provider and Pediatrics for the affected workers. The division determined that the employer paid the affected workers employees straight time for all hours worked instead of paying time and a half, which is required by law. Finally, we have a broad update in the coal mining sector, where the U.S. Department of Labor announced on the 31st of July that impact inspections completed by its Mine and Safety and Health Administration at 18 mines in 12 states in June of 2023 led the agency to issue 242 violations. The agency began doing impact inspections after the deaths of 29 miners in an explosion at the Upper Big Branch mine in April of 2010, one of the deadliest in U.S. history. To date, MSHA's impact inspections in 2023 have identified 1,435 violations, including 411 significant and substantial violations and 22 unwarrantable failure findings. A significant and substantial violation is reasonably likely to cause a reasonably serious injury or illness, and violations designated as unwarrantable failures occur when an inspector finds aggravated conduct that constitutes more than ordinary negligence. The agency conducts these impact inspections at mines that merit increased agency attention and enforcement due to poor compliance history, previous accidents, injuries, and illnesses, and other compliance concerns. Among the 242 violations that MSHA issued in June, the agency evaluated 71 as substantial and serious and found 4 to have unwarrantable failure findings. The inspections included mines in Alabama, Illinois, Kentucky, Michigan, Missouri, New York, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, Texas, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. 2 of the inspections in June provide examples of some of the hazards that miners faced. So, for example, on June the 6th, MSHA conducted an impact inspection at Kentucky Fuel Corporation's WV3 surface mine in Logan County, West Virginia, due to enforcement history and receiving hazardous condition complaints. MSHA issued 42 violations to the mine operator, including 17 substantial and serious and 3 unwarrantable failure findings, including an unwarrantable failure order for aggravated conduct for failing to maintain effective dust control measures on a drill. That's important because drill operators face heightened risk of exposure due to respirable crystalline silica. We're going to be talking about that more in a bit, which is a carcinogen far more toxic than coal dust alone. Exposure to unhealthy levels of silica can lead to debilitating and deadly work-related illnesses such as silicosis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and progressive massive fibrosis. On June 30th, 2023, MSHA announced proposed amendments to the current federal standards to better protect the nation's miners from health hazards related to exposure to silica dust in June 2022. Finally, the last example is in San Antonio, Texas. MSHA issued Superior Silica Sands LLC 31 violations, including unsafe electrical equipment and cables, inadequate workplace conditions, exposed moving machine parts, slip, trip, and fall hazards, and inadequate training. They also received a citation for allowing truck drivers to operate vehicles at near high-voltage power lines. 3 industry workers have suffered fatal injuries in 2023 when their mobile equipment made contact with overhead power lines, which led MSHA to issue electrical safety alerts to raise awareness. And so we're going to wrap up Boss Watch this week by alerting bosses to the fact that the U.S. Department of Labor and its partners from the Interagency Task Force to Combat Child Labor Exploitation announced on July the 27th its recent actions to hold companies accountable for violating child labor laws. So the U.S. Department of Labor is really ramping up child labor law enforcement by, in part, collaborating more and more seriously with the Departments of Agriculture, Commerce, Education, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Justice, and State. So that's all really, really important stuff. And for the non-ghouls in the audience, if you are not somebody that is potentially at risk of violating child labor laws, but you want to know how to report people that you think might be, the Department of Labor is holding a webinar to tell people about whistleblower protections that exist. And we created a handy short URL to go to that webinar. You can go to tvlr.fm/child labor if you're interested in attending that webinar and learning what whistleblower protections there are for child labor laws. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.